Now, this has been a long-running saga, so let's bring in a veteran of the mining industry to try and understand exactly what's going on in Mali. Peter Majors, the Director of Mining at Modern Corporate Solutions, is joining us on the program today. Peter, thank you for your time as always. So let's start with the basics here, right? What exactly do Mali's military rulers want Barrick to agree to? Is it a higher stake in the mine? Is it higher royalty rates? Or are there other things that they want but they're not making public?
Well, certainly the things that they've made public are a lot more than what they have been getting. And Barrick's been trying to negotiate with them, but you can see if you don't negotiate fast enough and willingly enough and you satisfy their demands, then they up the game another notch. That means they start taking hostages. And they did that with Resolute Gold Mine, which is the third biggest gold miner there. B2 Gold seems to have gotten through, but they had to pay a very big, do we call it a surcharge? Do we call it a back payment? You know, if you get hauled into a room and you see a set of accounts that somebody's put together without you playing any role in it, and these accounts now say, or are interpreted to say, you owe hundreds of millions of dollars in back taxes for the previous years that you illegitimately got out of, you kind of got a gun to your head, and literally. So if anybody knows Mali, it's Mark Bristow. Mark Bristow theoretically was the first Westerner to start a large Western gold mine there when he worked for Randgold in 1996. So Mark is not an amateur. He's been dealing with the country for 30 years. There must be something we don't know, but yes, they're asking for up to 35% ownership of the mine instead of 20. They're asking for royalties of getting up to 7.5% of sales revenue for anything better than a $1,500 gold price. And they're probably asking for a few things that we didn't see.
Right. So other gold mining firms in the country, like you just said, right, B2 Gold, for example, they've essentially announced these settlements, relatively hefty ones, with a military junta who's running the country now. That includes higher royalty rates, payments to the state. We saw the same thing with the Australian mining firm. From Barrick's perspective, though, what's their argument for not agreeing to these things? Is it that they've been improperly introduced, or it's essentially acting like an extra legal way of trying to vary the terms of the mining lease and the mining contract they have with the government?
Yeah, I would say things kind of came to a head in September last year. The military junta had introduced new mining legislation, and I know we first heard from Barrick, who's the largest gold producer there. They said, well, we don't have too big a problem, but we assume that this new legislation applies to new mines. You know, we've got contracts and agreements we've adhered to for the previous legislation. So you can't just bring in new legislation and retroactively expect the others, the older mines to fit into that. Now, the government got a bit agitated with that, and Barrick said, we can keep talking about the new mines, new production, and your new legislation. And then the government got very agitated in October, and Barrick actually made a payment, I think, of about $85 million to say, look, this is a goodwill payment showing that we're pursuing negotiations in goodwill. We're not agreeing that we've done anything wrong in the past, and we'll keep on negotiating. Then the government got rough with Resolute, actually took some of their people hostage, including their CEO. So it's been very tense for all companies.
And there's also been an arrest warrant issued out for Mark Bristow as well, isn't there?
That's right. So because Barrick hasn't paid as readily as the others, they've upped the heat in the kitchen. But I can't say that Barrick's being more argumentative than the other gold mining companies. And we don't know what kind of numbers their recalculations look like. You know, maybe B2 Gold thought, hey, this could have been a lot worse, let's just pay it. And maybe Barrick said, geez, this is horrendously worse compared to what we have paid. And they should get credit for what they have paid. You know, Barrick said, I think it was just last year, paid over $450 million directly to the government. That's on top of paying all the wages and paying for services. So the governments don't understand how little profits gold mines make over time. You know, the Barrick share price is trading where it was 25 years ago. That's not a very good return on investment. So, but hey, when government's got the gun, you have to go a lot on what they say
Right.
and not a lot on what logic and commercial says.
Indeed. And Barrick Gold has also filed for arbitration. So, if we're trying to game this down the line and we say, for the sake of argument, Barrick, Mali, they go for arbitration outside the country, Barrick wins. But what are the options that it actually has to enforce whatever judgment may come out of that arbitration process? Because the Malian authorities could just say, well, good luck, we're not complying.
They can say that, but there's some powerful precedents that would work on Barrick's side. And you just have to look south to the DRC when we had Canadian companies, First Quantum, gets their copper assets sold out from under them. First, they got requisitioned by the government. They said, oh, you're in breach. We're taking your mine away. And the government immediately flipped it to an Asian company. Well, boy, First Quantum, they did everything right. They went to the World Court. They went to the World Bank. They went to the IMF. And you know what? When you get those organizations on your side, you can freeze the accounts of a country. You can just stop the flow. And that might be what needs to happen here. Because as long as an extortionist gets away with what he's doing, he'll do it again and he'll do it again. So Barrick will have redress. And they may call for a world court judge or 3 or 4 organizations, credible organizations, to review what they're being faced with.
Indeed. One last question for you, Peter. The mining lease for this particular mine, Loulo-Gounkoto, it's the second most productive, right, in Barrick's portfolio. The mining lease ends next year, and the military authorities have actually threatened to not renew that lease entirely. So let's assume that happens. What happens next? Does a mine then go up for auction to another firm? Does the government take it over entirely? What happens to Barrick's investment in equipment that actually is existing there? Do they get to claim it back? How does this work?
Boy, I don't know. And these are powerful questions. We had something like this in South Africa. In 2004, the South African government nationalized all the mines in the country in one sweep. And there were a few companies that took them to court, a few foreign companies, and they actually won, but it took years and years of negotiation. What the companies here did, they negotiated with the government, okay, we will allow you to nationalize the mine ore bodies, but you cannot nationalize our property, all the equipment, all the infrastructure. And so the government actually got out pretty good down here for what they did. They were able to negotiate with the companies rather than had all the companies stuck together, go to the World Court, the IMF, the World Bank. They could have said, this nationalization is not fair, it's unethical, and hey, we could have had big sanctions on this country again. So what's going to happen in Mali? I think they may have to do negotiation on both sides. The government can't just take that whole mine and sell it, right? The world will have to step in and say, this is worse than expropriation.
Indeed.
This is grand theft.